Hello chaps, it's Commodore Graham here. I'm just making this video in order to share with you everything that I've figured out, learned, and everything that I implement in order to make my mic audio sound as good as possible when I'm recording it in OBS. Although a lot of the principles that I'm going to cover here, a lot of the tips, apply whether you're using OBS or not. So, with that in mind, the first thing that we're going to cover, or the first few things that we're going to cover, have nothing to do with OBS at all, and they're more to do with just generally setting up your mic. Now, I made myself kind of some bullet points here, just to make sure that I don't miss anything, because if I miss something, then you'll miss something. So, the most important thing to start off with is to make sure that you don't have any mechanical vibrations reaching your microphone, because that can be a huge source of noise. For instance, with my own setup, I used to get a lot more noise than I do now, and I eventually discovered that the reason for that is that one of the feet of the base of my microphone stand was touching the board that my PC rests on. So the noise from the PC fan was going all the way through about 2 or 3 meters of metal tubing, essentially, and the rubber feet of the microphone stand, getting to my microphone and producing this constant hum that's much louder than you would normally get. So that's something that I fixed. So you want to isolate your microphone as much as possible from these sources of mechanical hum. Make sure that neither the microphone or anything the microphone is attached to or touching is then mechanically coupled to anything that can be causing hum, which usually would be your PC. Hopefully, if you're recording, you would have turned off anything else that was causing a lot of vibration, like fan heaters or whatever else. You might have things on your desktop that produce mechanical hum, and you might then have your microphone stand attached to your desktop, which would give you the same problem. So if your only option is to have your microphone attached to your desktop by some sort of arm, then you want to try and reduce the effects of that by buying a shock mount. And if you don't know what a shock mount is, I'll put a picture of an example right now. So there you go, there's a shock mount. What else? Yes, the other thing is, aside from mechanical hum, you want to look out for direct noise. You know, noise that you have in the background. Like, again, the PC fans, aside from just causing mechanical vibrations through the arm that your mic's attached to, or the stand that your mic's on, just the actual audible sound of the fans can get into the microphone as well. So you may be limited in how far you can put your PC away from the microphone, but put your PC as far away as you can. But generally speaking, this is not going to be as much of a problem as the mechanical vibrations reaching the mic. It usually won't produce as much noise, and so it's a bit less of a worry. The other thing is that you want to use a pop shield. Now, if you don't know what a pop shield is, I will put a picture of that up right now. What you're seeing is a pop shield very similar to the one that I use. The reason that you need to use this is so that the plosive sounds, where you expel sudden gusts of air, like if you're going puh, puh, and buh, buh, and tuh, tuh, that you don't get sudden wind noise in the microphone, or at least it gets massively reduced, because that can sound really bad. Suddenly you have this really bassy sort of booming noise when you make those sounds. Next thing, and this is kind of a judgment call and people have their own preferences, the microphone should be somewhere between 3 and 8 inches from your mouth, generally speaking. The closer the microphone is to your mouth, the more bass you'll get in the sound. That's called the proximity effect, I think. The other thing is, the closer you are to the microphone, the louder the direct sound of your voice will be compared to any sort of echoes and reflections that are going off the walls. So if you want to reduce echo in the room, get closer to the mic, or that's at least a partial solution for reducing echo. And also, having certain things in your room can help. People often put up acoustic foam panels, things like that. That'll reduce reflections by a certain amount. There's a video that I saw where someone made their own acoustic panels with just a wooden frame with a lot of towels inside the frame, and that actually worked better than acoustic foam. So if I remember, I'll put a link to that in the description. If you happen to have carpet in your room, or like fabric hangings on the wall, or if you've got a sofa or a bed in your room, things like that, all of those sorts of things will reduce the echo and reflections. So you may not have the option to add those things to your room if they're not already in there, but if you can, those things will certainly help. Now, when it comes to distance from the mic, in my case, and like I say, it's up to your own judgment as to what you think sounds best and what's convenient for you. In my case, I've got the mic about 3 inches from my mouth. So as it says there on the screen, the pop shield that I showed you earlier has about 2 inches distance from the mic, and my mouth is literally right behind the pop shield. It makes more sense to put the pop shield closer to your mouth than to put it closer to the microphone, because then it's better at blocking and diffusing the gusts of wind from the b and p sort of sounds than if the pop shield is right next to the microphone. The gust of air doesn't get much of a chance to diffuse outwards before it hits the microphone, if that makes sense. There we have things covered that help with reducing, you know, mechanical vibrations and room echo and stuff. But also, when you're recording, any electrical devices that don't need to be on in your room, turn them all off, because you never know when you're going to get hum from somewhere or another. As a matter of fact, because it varies throughout the day, as far as I know, I might be getting a little bit of hum right now. You might be hearing it, you might not. There is something that can be done about that. If you do still get that problem, you can use a noise suppression filter in OBS. But I'm just going to go ahead and assume that I'm probably not getting those problems right now, because usually when I only have my PC switched on, it's fine. But there are those sort of electrical sources of hum that can end up getting into your microphone, as well as actual mechanical hum or just ambient sound being picked up by the microphone itself. So, for instance, I've got an LED lamp on my desk, and I also have some powered speakers on my desk. And when I'm recording, I switch both of those off and just use headphones instead. And that definitely helps. Another thing that you can do, although I haven't done this myself, but apparently it can be very effective, is if the sound's going into your PC via USB in some way, like if you've got a USB microphone like mine, or if you've got a non-USB or a mic with an audio line that you send into a USB audio interface, if you get a powered USB hub, you can plug your microphone or audio interface into that and then plug that into your PC. Because if you're using a powered USB hub, you'll get better grounding. That's all of this kind of setup business that we have to think about before we even start thinking about software or recording or OBS or anything like that. Oh, the other thing that I should mention, actually, that just occurred to me, is I mentioned earlier that one of the feet on my microphone stand used to be touching the board that my PC is on, and therefore I got really bad mechanical vibrations. Another thing that I did to improve things a bit more is I got a few small towels, folded them up so that they were maybe like 4 or 6 or 8 folds thick, and put those under each of the feet of my microphone stand, because towels are very good at absorbing and dissipating those vibrations, and that definitely helped as well. So we're finally around just the physical setup of the microphone, pretty much, in terms of positioning, in terms of avoiding that kind of hum. So we can now move on to making sure you've got the levels set correctly in your microphone. So what you want to do is get some piece of software that will allow you to visually look at how loud your microphone is. What you can use is Audacity here, which is a free audio recording app. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. Now, if I click here on the, see you've got this is the microphone meter. If I click here to start monitoring, you'll see that it's starting to keep track of how loud my voice is and so forth. What we're trying to get here is a situation where the average volume of your voice is hovering around here, around minus 18 decibels. And you want the peaks only to be at about minus 6 decibels or something like that. There's a little line here that indicates that the loudest peak I've had so far is at about minus 8 decibels. If I spoke a bit louder, which I'll do right now, you can see that actually it got a little too loud at some point. Maybe I need to reduce my recording levels a bit actually myself. But it's very rare for that to happen actually. I was speaking really loudly is why that happened. But what you want generally is you want it to be hovering around minus 18 here, which it more or less is. You want the peaks to mostly not get above minus 6 decibels. If they do get above minus 6, occasionally, it's not a disaster. But if it gets up to 0, then you will get you'll get distortion, like this particular kind of distortion called digital clipping distortion, which sounds pretty nasty, generally speaking. Maybe you can get away with a tiny little bit of it, but it's best to try and avoid it altogether. So another thing that you can do is start recording your voice to have a look at the waveform. So if I do that now, I'll just keep chuntering on whilst it records, and you end up with a waveform sort of about this size. When it gets up to this sort of level, that's kind of, yeah, right here. That's at about, or slightly higher, that will be at minus 6 decibels. So you don't want it to get above about here, which is about where this 0.6 level thing is. And yeah, if it clips completely, like if I just talk really loudly so that it clips, right, let's stop that. You'll see that it goes beyond the level at which it can record and you get a little bit of distortion. And you might have heard that. So again, it's possible that I might need to turn my my recording levels down slightly from what they currently are. But yes, normally I won't be talking nearly this loudly, so it's generally not a problem. So that's what you're going for, and you will have 1 or 2 controls that you can adjust to do something about this. Now, your microphone might or it might not have its own gain control. I'm using a Blue Yeti, which does have a gain control, and I actually have that set down to the minimum it will go down to. I'd say I have it set at 0, but obviously the 0 is not truly 0, otherwise no sound would be coming out right now. So I've got it set down to the minimum, and I have the Windows microphone volume set at 0.80. That's how it shows in Audacity. But if you want to look at that in Windows itself, go to your sound settings. I'll get rid of that again. Recording. And you should, if you've got your microphone set up right, your microphone should be right here. Go to Properties, Levels, and you can see instead of saying 0.80, it actually says 80, like 80 out of 100. You might have a gain control on your mic, but if you don't, this is the only control that you have over the volume of your microphone. Like I say, I'm using a Blue Yeti. With how I have things set up, with the microphone being as close as it is to my mouth, and my voice being the volume that it is, I have my Blue Yeti gain set down to the minimum, and the Windows gain here set to 80. Right, let's pop back to my list to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Like I say, once you've used Audacity or some other software to find out how loud your microphone signal is, adjust it either on the microphone or in the Windows volume setting, or both, until you get around 18 decibels in general and peaks maybe around 6 decibels. Basically, what we're trying to make it as loud as possible without getting actual clipping distortion from it going all the way up to 0 decibels. The other thing that I should mention is if you do have a gain control on your microphone, it's a good idea to reduce that gain first before you reduce the Windows volume, because when you lower the gain on the microphone itself, you tend to get less background noise, or at least that's my experience. The next thing we're going to start getting to OBS here. We've got our volume set right on the microphone, but that actually comes out pretty quietly, because when you set it at the right volume not to end up distorting, naturally it's fine. You might be happy with the volume, but there are things that you can do to boost the volume without making it distort. And that's what we'll be talking about now. So I have various filters here. Only the ones that aren't crossed out are switched on at the moment. So I've got a noise gate and 3 other filters. We're only really going to be going over 3 of those to any great extent in this video. Or, well, I might put a bonus bit at the end about this thing, which is a multiband compressor. But don't worry about that right now. The plugins I use, the noise gate is just the noise gate that comes with OBS Studio. You don't have to worry about obtaining and installing that. But there are 2 other filters that I use, a compressor and a limiter, and you have to get those separately. So I'll show you that now. The plugins that I use are this one, FR Comp 87, and this one, FR Limit 87, which are free plugins provided by a company called Earreckon. I guess that's probably how you pronounce it. So what you need to do is download those and install them. In order to do so, as it says here, you need to make a user account, which is free. And then there's a link to go to the product's registration page. And when you've gone through that process, you can download these 2 plugins. These are the 2. I'm sure these are probably good as well, but I don't use these. I just use the compressor here and the limiter here. One thing that you have to take into consideration here is whether you're using a 32-bit or 64-bit version of OBS. As you can see, I'm using 64-bit OBS, so I needed to download the 64-bit versions of these 2 plugins. Of course, there's nothing stopping you from downloading and installing both the 32 and the 64-bit versions. So, you know, maybe to be safe, just install both. So I'm going to assume now that you've made an account, downloaded the plugins, installed them on your PC. If you have OBS running, exit OBS and then start it up again so that it can scan for the new plugins that you've just installed. Let's check my list again just to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. As it says here, they're called FR Comp 87 and FR Limit 87, but I just showed you that in any case. Now you want to add them. I'll show you how to do that. Add them in OBS, I mean. So right in the middle here, we've got the mixer, which mixes together the sounds from your computer and from your microphone into a single track. What you want to do is where it says mic/aux, that's microphone/auxiliary, click on the settings wheel, the settings cog or gear wheel, whatever, and select filters. Now, the way that you add a new filter is like, well, firstly, I should say that the filters that are highest in the list are the ones that are applied to the audio first. In my case, what's happening is that the raw microphone audio is going through the noise gate, then the compressor, then the limiter, and then this other thing that I'll probably mention right at the end. But you don't need this extra thing, but you might want to try it. How you add a filter is just click the plus button, and you can select between, well, there are a few things here. OBS has its own compressor, but I don't like it as much as the one that I use, so I ignore that. There's a gain filter for just turning up the volume. Don't use that either. There's a noise gate, which I use, the noise suppression filter, which I sometimes use, then an option for inserting VST plugins. And that's what I'm using for the FR Comp and FR Limit VST plugins that we just installed. What you would do, and I'll do this and then I'll just delete them again. You want to insert the noise suppression. Oh, right. I'm going to have to call it something else. You don't have to do this. You just call it noise suppression. I'll just call it noise suppression 2. Then you'd put in the noise gate 2 in my case, and then VST plugin, and that name's already in use, so I'll call it VST plugin 2. Then just turn off your noise suppression because you're quite likely not to need that at all. Now you can change the name of these inserts, of these plugin inserts, just by right-clicking and clicking rename. And that's what I've done in my case. I renamed this one to this for the compressor, and I renamed the second one to this for the limiter. What I'm going to do now, though, to avoid any further confusion, is just delete all of these. You want to have the noise suppression, noise gate, and these two VST plugins, and rename them either to this or to whatever you want. You might be using a different compressor and limiter to mine anyway. There are other options, like say for instance this one and this one. This is another compressor and limiter that I used to use. So you want to have the compressor, limiter and noise gate turned on and the noise suppression turned off. You'll only turn that on if you really need it. If despite following all of my instructions you still end up with noise that you don't want in the microphone, then you might want to use the noise suppression as well. So we just installed this VST 2.x plugin thing and renamed it to whatever we wanted. And you want to select a plugin. So there's a drop-down box here for the plugin, and all I've done is I've selected the 64-bit version of the compressor that we've installed. Now you want to give it the correct settings, so I'll show you what my settings are. Now this is a very simple compressor compared to a lot of others, but I think it sounds very nice because it kind of simulates old school analog electronics, I guess. There are only a few settings here. I have the threshold set at -18 decibels, which if you'll remember, that's the same level that we set our average volume at when we were looking at it with Audacity. And I set the makeup gain here to 9 decibels. That means that after it goes through the compressor, we're adding 9 decibels of gain, which is plenty. You don't really need any more than that. You can, like, I'll go into the sort of settings you can use if you want to have a slightly different sound at the expense of a little bit of sound quality, perhaps. So yes, we've got -18 decibels on the threshold, 9 decibels of makeup gain. Attack and release are both set at fast. You see you can choose different settings, but for speech, fast is good. And we have a limiter here, which I switched to on. You might wonder why I'm doing this if I've got another plugin that I'm using as a limiter after this. But what this does is just make sure that the output leaving the compressor doesn't get above 0 decibels. It won't clip on the output, which is important because we're adding 9 decibels of gain here. Unlike a lot of compressors, this doesn't have a ratio setting. The compression ratio just sort of automatically adjusts itself on the basis of what your threshold and makeup gain are. So you just don't worry about that, it sets itself. So if we go to the limiter now, I'll show you the settings on this, it's even simpler. I've set the threshold to -3.5 decibels, and there's this switch here, slow release, which I have switched off. And the reason that I've got the limit set at -3.5 decibels instead of having it set at 0 decibels is that usually I want to mix the sound of my microphone with sounds from my computer, like for instance, mixed with the sound effects and music from a game or something like that I happen to be recording. So you do want to give yourself a little bit of headroom so that when you add the game sounds or whatever, it doesn't start distorting from being overloaded again. That's it as far as the plugin settings go. Oh, I almost forgot. Noise gate settings, very important. Here are the settings that I have, which should also apply to you if you've got your microphone volume set at around the same level that I have, which you should have if you followed the instructions up until now. So there are two thresholds here. There's the threshold at which the noise gate closes and opens. What it does is it just silences the mic audio if it falls below minus 45 decibels, and then opens the gate so that sound can get through if the mic audio coming in is above minus 39 decibels. So, I mean, you don't really necessarily have to worry about how it works, but these are the settings that I'd recommend if you've got your mic volume set the same as mine. And the way you do that is going to, obviously, like I said, it'll be different depending on your setup and depending on the microphone that you're using. But that was covered earlier in the video, so let's not worry about that. Set the attack time to 25 milliseconds and the hold and release time to 50 milliseconds. I don't have any particular rationale behind those settings other than I found some tips on the internet and then I adjusted it slightly until it seemed about right. So my noise gate seems to work pretty much perfectly right now without me having to worry about any words getting cut off at the end or anything like that. So that's as far as it goes for settings. Let me see if there's anything else that we need to check here. So, noise suppression. Now, you might need this or you might not. The thing to do would be for you to make some test recordings and see whether you still have problems with noise, even after you've reduced all the sources of noise you possibly can and you've applied the noise gate. This noise suppressor, essentially it can be applied either very lightly or very heavily. And the more heavily you apply it, the more it's likely to affect the quality of the sound and make it maybe not sound as good as it possibly otherwise would. But for most people, they're more interested in getting rid of the noise, because if there's some sort of hum or electrical whine or something switching on and off all the time when the noise gate opens and closes, that generally sounds pretty bad. The range on this is 0 decibels of suppression all the way to minus 60 decibels, depending on how heavily you want to apply it. What you want to do is, if you do need to use the noise suppressor, apply it as lightly as you possibly can to get the desired result, i.e. either no audible noise or an amount of audible noise that you find acceptable. Personally, when I do need to suppress the noise, I generally only need to apply somewhere between 15 and 20 decibels. If you have worse noise than I do, if and when you do get noise, you might want to take it up really far. You'll just have to experiment and find out. But for now, let me set that back to what it was and make sure it's turned off. If you need the noise suppression, obviously you need to activate it like that. That's about everything, except for, I suppose, a little bit of bonus content that I'm going to put at the end here. Multiband compressors. You're not going to have to worry about this, but I'm very finicky and particular. I like to fiddle with the sound to get it just exactly how I want it. So if we go back into the filters again, I have this thing here, ReXComp, which is a multiband compressor made by Reaper. So let me show you that. There's this suite of VST plugins that Reaper produces that's free called Replugs. Again, there's a 32-bit and a 64-bit version. You might as well install them both, but if you're using 32-bit OBS, make sure you at least have the 32-bit version. And if you're using 64-bit OBS, make sure you at least have the 64-bit version of the plugin. So this will install several plugins really, but we're only interested in one this time. Let me find this. If I go into the drop down, when you've installed these plugins, and again, in order for OBS to scan and recognize the plugins, you'll have to restart OBS probably. In the drop down box, it's called ReXComp Standalone. That's what you're looking for. Now this is a much more complicated plugin, but we're not using it in a very complicated way. Now you see there are certain frequencies in the voice that are very important for making your voice as understandable as possible. But at the same time, if they get too loud, they can end up sounding a little bit harsh. So that's what I'm using this plugin for. I'm selecting a particular range of frequencies and applying compression just to those, so that if those frequencies get too loud, they get squashed just a little bit, just to take a little bit of harshness off my voice that might otherwise be there. So if we go into the settings, this multiband compressor gives you 4 bands. What you're going to want to do is go into band 1, 2, and 4 and deactivate them. So there, band 1 is active, but we want to turn it off. Do that for 1, 2, and 4. What we want is, wait, if I go into band 3, you can see here, this is the only one that's active. And this yellow number, it's telling me how much those frequencies are being reduced by in decibels at any given moment. So as you can see, it goes between kind of not being reduced at all to maybe taking about 6 decibels, 5 or 6 decibels off the volume of those frequencies. Firstly, you need to set this frequency range. The way you do it is slightly fiddly. What you do is you go actually into the second band, the second tab here, and set the top of the second band at 2500 Hertz. Because setting the top of this band is how you set the bottom of the band that we're actually working with. Then set the top frequency of this band, of the third band, the one that's actually active, at 4000 Hertz. This may vary actually depending on your voice. If you're female, you might want to set this at 4500. Just because that particular range of frequencies in the female voice is a little higher than for the male voice. But the settings that I've got here might work perfectly well for you. The idea of what we're trying to do, like I said, to retain intelligibility and understandability whilst reducing the harshness if these frequencies get too loud. What we have here is a threshold. And I have this multiband compressor working as a limiter, really, but that's probably going to get too complicated if I get into that. I'll just go with the numbers. So I set the threshold in my case, and you can experiment with this to see how you get the best results. But for me, I've got the threshold set at minus 20 decibels. So if those frequencies get above minus 20 decibels in volume, they get compressed. And I set the ratio really high. That's why I said I'm kind of using it like a limiter. I set the ratio at 10 to 1. You can see here. So just minus 20 in this box, minus 10 in this box, 4000 in this one, and then on the second tab, 2500 in this one. That's all you need to know. This is just something you can try. It might not work for you. It might not improve things for you. It might even make things worse. But this is something that I'm applying right now. You're hearing my voice obviously going through this filter at the moment. I think there was one other thing that I wanted to mention. Let me remind myself. In the OBS mixer, I have the desktop audio volume set to minus 4.5 decibels. The reason for this is, if you remember, we had the microphone limited via this plugin here, limited to minus 3.5 decibels. That means that the microphone level can't get above that volume, ever. As you can see, even if I speak really loudly, hold on, I'll speak really loudly. You can see it never gets past this point here, although it might have distorted a little from me speaking much more loudly than I normally would. If we make it so that the game sounds or whatever else is coming from the computer itself can't get above minus 4.5 decibels, then when we combine that with the minus 3.5 decibels of the microphone, it will never get up to 0 decibels. It might get as high as minus 1 decibels, which means when you add the two sources of sound together, it should never end up distorting just from them being added together. Right, I suppose I should do some sort of summary here. Try and reduce sources of like mechanical vibrations getting to the mic. Try and reduce extraneous noise getting to the mic. You want the general sound level of the microphone to be around minus 18 decibels, with the peaks being around minus 6 decibels. I recommend these plugins. You can use other things, but obviously this is what I've given instructions for, these 3 plugins. But if you use a different kind of compressor and limiter, try to set it up so that it basically does the same thing as what I've shown you here. Only use a noise gate. Don't use the noise suppression plugin unless you have to. So I'm just using the noise gate. because otherwise there would be some noise that you would hear in pauses in speech. But only use the noise suppression itself if you really have to, because it reduces the quality of the audio a bit. And yes, there's this multiband compressor thing that you can mess around with if you want to get really pedantic about things. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. I hope that was really useful, because that's pretty much everything that I've found out or figured out so far. So hopefully it'll be useful to you as well. So, I mean, I guess that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was useful. If it was, do please click the like button. It helps out rather a lot. Leave your thoughts and suggestions in the comments section below. Share this video with anyone you think it might help. And subscribe if and only if you'd like to see more. Ta-ta for now, chaps.